Radio Okitalk, Radio Okitalk, von Mensch zu Mensch.
Welcome to the Wizard of Odd edition 19 with Bryan Lahr, this time talking about transplantation of consciousness. Welcome.
Hey, Raphael, how are you today, man? It's crazy world we're living in out there. And I'd sort of like, before we dive into the
out there or in here?
Both. I think everywhere is just a crazy world, man. Definitely, if you consider my my own personal universe, I got my crazy card checked decades ago, man.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now it's like a variant of the reflective mirror, like crazy inside, crazy outside, maybe slightly different type, who knows, but intensity increases for sure.
Yeah. So I'd like to just, do a little what's going on in the world update before we get into the heart of it, man. I'm looking around at what's going on in our cities right now, and people keep talking about, wow, there's going to be a civil war, or there'll be a civil. It's my assertion. We're in the middle of a civil war right now, man. It's really, really crazy, man. You see people just taking over cities, and crime just skyrocketing everywhere, and it's spiraling out of control in so many ways. It's just kind of crazy. And the sad part about it is that, you come to the realization really quickly that it's none of that's about like, let's figure it out. We're all in this together. Let's figure it out. It's kind of like, no, tear that thing down, man. And it's like there's so much energy being exerted towards crushing things that exist and trying to erase history, and just in things I think are just crazy. This is a really kind of an awesome place. There's no place that's perfect, certainly on this world, but in terms of being able to define your own person and define the kind of life you would want to have, and opportunity to go get that. I think it's pretty much as good as anywhere I've gotten to experience so far. And it's no system is perfect, but that's why, you continue to do updates, and there just doesn't seem to be any talking, and just seems to be lots of, lobbing missiles across lines, and Are you kind of experiencing the civil unrest scenario where you're living?
I believe I may have mentioned last time that we had some, let's say, short outbreak because they basically allowed 4 days in a row in Vienna to have a demonstration by, I assume, quote-unquote, Kurdish, quote-unquote, left-wing, but this is just an attribution now, And at the same time, apparently, they are just, again, I'm just using the label now, another group from Turkey identified as so-called grey wolves, or at least doing the signs, then honestly, to me, also this seems like super, in a sense, astroturfed or whatever. But basically they allowed for 3 or 4 days in a row to have the one group do announcements. And even I think the first day, the other group already came and were like causing trouble, and they were like fighting each other. And for some strange reason, they allowed the following days for the same announcement type thing to more clashes until after, I guess, the 4th day or something. Then there, I don't know, was some news or whatever. And then apparently whatever level in the government decided that, and also I actually decided this for myself, that this is not nice to be happening in Vienna, because Vienna generally is, as they always say, the land of the blessed ones, let's say, even just Austria itself, as you may know, very calm and very, even highly regarded as a very secure place and a very prosperous place. So eventually, actually, they seem to have decided that they don't want burning balconies and stuff like that, which had happened in the 10th district. So by now it appears that everything is calm again. And as you apparently are reconnecting right now, we're just going to do a first early music break and then continue with our discussion. Welcome back to the Wizard of Oz edition 19 with Bryan Lahr, Transplantation of Consciousness. Welcome back.
Now I'm like choking. I'm like coughing out a lung. You know, I'm just not so together this morning, Raphael. Bear with me, man. I'm so sorry.
It's all fine.
Yeah, just kind
Probably
of like
not the only one on
falling,
this now.
falling apart, man. I just got to gather up all the pieces here and try to glue myself back together. So, you know, I'm excited about our topic today. It's something that I use a great deal, and I had been exposed to it first in Bardon's book, Initiation into Hermetics, and then I really got deeply into it when, you know, our favorite Ron Clark book, The Bardon Companion, man, he synthesizes this process down to such a doable chunk of learning. But before we get into the actual learning of the process, I was just curious. You know, I know you've done a ton of reading over the years, and just wanted to know if you had any particularly favorite magical people out of the many that you have investigated.
You mean in terms of like authors, books?
Well, for me, you know, the reason I asked that is because Franz Bardon is definitely like on the top of my list, and I was wondering if there was any people like that for you that you had. That,
right.
Yeah.
So historically, in a sense, I would say one of the first real treasure troves I stumbled upon when I went, you know, as consciously and deep into all of these topics as I could at that point. This was, I would now assume, around 2011. I mean, I did plenty of research before. I guess, you know, after doing some investigation into like, you know, study books on neurology and so on, which is more like interesting, but also boring, or French philosophy, which can be interesting, but you could condense it down to like 2 pages. I don't know, usually it seemed to me. And then slowly getting to the more interesting things. The first one I would have to mention probably is Jiru Krishnamurti. Maybe he's not magical in traditional sense, but he was like one of the first guys. I think I even saw him at the beginning or end of some Zeitgeist movie, which were very popular back then. Either the first one or it was Zeitgeist Addendum, where he's just talking about the radical revolution of consciousness and how basically how it's all an internal process. He's also talking in a kind of cryptic way and so on, and strange because he has this, you know, very nice British authoritative sounding accent, but he's basically speaking of Eastern philosophy. So maybe that would be the first one. And then the other one I would have to give mention as well is Michael Thiserion. He's been a, let's say, alternative researcher since many, many years, and his topics range from the Irish origins of civilization to Atlantis, something along the lines of cataclysm and genetic manipulation. And recently even so he always continued publishing. He's done many different things on, one may say, conspiratorial topics, but always from a psychological point of view. So what he likes to refer to is the imperial self, which is just like the higher self or the greater consciousness. And yeah, with him, I really like his approach. He's maybe not magical in a sense, like, I don't know, doing rituals I'm impressed with, but in terms of like being a teacher and from my perspective, having a really clear view. These may be two. Of course, there's many more depending on what topic or time frame we would go into.
That's so true. There's so many of them for sure. I ran into Franz Barden's books back in the early 90s, and Initiation into Hermetics was the first one I got. And to be honest with you, the first read through on that book, many of those topics were so foreign to me and outside anything that I had done, from a practical practice standpoint, that a lot of it just like went over my head. But there was something that really resonated about him. And then somebody gave me a book called Forbado, the Magician. And have you heard about that? You heard about that book?
I do not think so.
Yeah, it's way worth the read. It was written by Franz Barden's assistant, and it was a biography, loose, like a biodrama. She kind of like, it was a story that was loosely based on his life. He was a pretty intense guy. He was a Czech guy, and he made a living like in the 20s and 30s doing magic shows, but his effects were actually real. That was one of the things that attracted me to him too, was the fact that he did projective stuff in addition to just ritual and receptive work. And so he wound up doing that circuit for a long time, and then started teaching. And his the book, the thing in Forbado that I loved so much was he was not really a member of a lodge or any kind of brotherhood, or he was kind of a lone ranger out there doing his work. And in the book Forbado, he got attacked by a dark kind of coven scenario. In a way, it was I think it was loosely based on the war between Aleister Crowley and MacGregor Mathers, and they're like trying to zap each other back and forth. So a lot of it was concerned with the group of dark wizards getting together and trying to kill Forbado because he was going out and doing real stuff and sharing real information with the world at large. And the fact that he didn't want to be part of any group sort of pissed them off and made them want to try to destroy him. So he weathered innumerable attacks, and there were so many different ways of diffusing each of those attacks, which at the time just kind of seemed, like an interesting story. But I saved all of those up, and he winds up, coming out on top of that scenario. And in real life, he was arrested by the Nazis for not wanting to do any occult work for them. And he was put in prison for a long time. And, a concentration camp specifically. And the thing that saved him was the Allies bombed that particular camp, and everybody got to go free, and he made it out into the world. And then he moved back to Czechoslovakia and stayed there for many years and taught and published books. And one day showed up. This is in 1958, the year of my birth. They showed up at his house and arrested him for promoting occult practices. And he wound up dying in prison about 3 or 4 months later from pancreatitis. So he had a really kind of intense little life, but he put so many things out. Like, I'm still going back and, you know, in preparation for this, I went back and reviewed Initiation into Hermetics again. And man, it just never ceases to amaze me. Every single time I go and read that book, I just become aware of some new aspect I hadn't considered. And the thing I really enjoy about his stuff is that it's all things that he's actually done and practiced. And just like my favorite chaos magicians, you know, they'll use anything, you know. So his magical cosmology was built up of many different traditions, you know, Western magical traditions, some Zen things, some Chinese black hat things, you know, some shamanistic stuff, and they were all pieces of things that he had gathered over his own travels and put together in this really concise and you know, relatively easy to understand considering the complexity of the subjects. And you know, so many of the writers, you know, Crowley, all those guys, you know, the things they wrote and put out had lots of real information in it. But like and especially Eliphas Levi, you know, they hid secrets in there so that if you weren't part of an initiatory group, you know, they put in things that were mistakes or would take you to somewhere else, you know, so you didn't have the actual keys to really be able to drive the car, you know. It's like it's a car without a steering wheel. You know, you just get to turn on the gas and drive straight out the garage door and into the tree in front of you, you know. So that was always one of my favorite things about Franz Barton as well, is that, you know, he didn't hide anything. You know, what he put down was the actual product of his practice and seeing if that worked for him before he put it down. And I've yet to find any little booby traps or you know, trick questions or anything that would keep you from actually getting down into the meat of whatever he's talking about doing. And, you know, his very first, one of the best things about the hardback version of that book is he drew his own Magus card, tarot card. And that's at the very beginning of the book, a color plate at the very beginning of the book. And, you know, it was a system where, you know, he was recognizing he called them magnetic fluids, you know, it's the masculine, feminine principle. It's the, you know, and that was really the first system that I had practical experience with that really fused all of those things in a way that resonated with me. Like, man, my solar plexus rang like the biggest church bell you've ever heard, you know. And it has well, you know, he's not very well known, actually.
Can you kindly repeat his name and the book again?
His name is Franz, F-A-R-N-Z, Bardon, B-A-R-D-O-N. And the name of that book, it's a short book. It's a really easy read. It's Fraboto, F-R-A-B-O-T-O, the Magician. And that's kind of a fictional version of his life, which is, super interesting. I think you'd really dig it. And then you know, his he published a lot of books, but his the two of his books that are kind of like timeless are Initiation into Hermetics, and that's the book that Ron Clark published, a Bardon Companion.
Right.
That's the book that kind of like puts that in modern language, and the way he kind of broke down what Bardon was saying. You know, Bardon spoke, you know, he used a lot of phraseology and just his speaking voice when he wrote. You know, it was easy for me to take things a slightly different way maybe than they were when I first read them. And, you know, Ron Clark has this really knack for crystallizing it in a way that makes it so easy to grasp and wrap your mind around before you start trying to dive in.
Right.
You know, yeah. So
what I'd like to mention, of course, when we talk about magical, for me, magical individuals and solar plexus resonance and so on, heart chakra resonance. Of course, the one I'm always mentioning, you know, Daryl Anka and Bashar. That was like, even though it's a channel and so on, but for me, as I had already researched for a few years all of these kind of things, then I stumbled across him, saw some random channelings, him talking about auras at a festival, you know, with closed eyes, and I was like, strange guy. And then I looked up the basics, and then I was like, wow, I couldn't put it simpler and more precise and concise than this channel is doing it. And also, just as you mentioned, in terms of no trick questions or no confusion in a sense, but a really, really straightforward, simple framework to follow that, again, as I understand it, just, you know, allows for everything else to be subsumed within it. Of course, this has not been the first time. I think even Bashar says, for example, Jane Roberts with Seth is like the teacher of teachers. I even didn't read her yet. So that would certainly be another front. And what I'd like to do, if you agree, speaking of different magical texts, is I would like to read 3 paragraphs from the conclusion of Manly Palmer Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, who of course always has to be mentioned as well. He also has a chapter. He also has a chapter on cryptography, as I'm sure you're aware. So anyone who thinks it's kind of strange what we're talking about here, I mean, by now, especially if anyone is into Q or into even just any type of military coding, there's so many, you know, lawyers speak, let's say biological speak. There are so many actually arcane variants of language already that may not be obviously magical to us, but are in a sense cryptic systems only for the so-called initiated. However,
so true.
of course,
It's a perfect example.
Yeah. So in the conclusion, Manly Palmer Hall is speaking of this, and I will read 3 paragraphs. So he says, basically it is about Alexander the Great, in this story at least, being a student of Aristotle. And here it says, while on his Asiatic campaign, Alexander learned that Aristotle had published one of his most prized discourses, an occurrence which deeply grieved the young king. So to Aristotle, conqueror of the unknown, Alexander, conqueror of the known, sent this reproachful and pathetic admission of the insufficiency of worldly pomp and power. Quote, Alexander to Aristotle, health. You were wrong in publishing those branches of science hitherto not to be acquired except from oral instruction. In what shall I excel others if the more profound knowledge I gain from you be communicated to all? For my part, I had rather surpassed the majority of mankind in the sublimer branches of learning than in extent of power and dominion. Farewell. The receipt of this amazing letter caused no ripple in the placid life of Aristotle, who replied that although the discourse had been communicated to the multitudes, none who had not heard him deliver the lecture, who lacked spiritual comprehension, could understand its true import. A few short years, and Alexander the Great went the way of all flesh, and with his body crumbled the structure of empire erected upon his personality. 1 year later, Aristotle also passed into the greater world, concerning whose mysteries he had so often discoursed with his disciples in the Lyceum. But as Aristotle excelled Alexander in life, so he excelled him in death. For though his body mouldered in an obscure tomb, the great philosopher continued to live in his intellectual achievements. Age after age paid him grateful tribute, generation after generation pondered over his theorems, until by the sheer transcendency of his rational faculties, Aristotle, the master of those who know, as Dante has called him, became the actual conqueror of the world, which Alexander had sought to subdue with the sword. Thus it is demonstrated that to capture a man, it is not sufficient to enslave his body. It is necessary to enlist his reason. That to free a man, it is not enough to strike the shackles from his limbs. His mind must be liberated from bondage to his own ignorance. Physical conquest must ever fail, for generating hatred and dissension, it spurs the mind to the avenging of an outraged body. But all men are bound, whether willingly or unwillingly, to obey that intellect, in which they recognize qualities and virtues superior to their own.
Well put. Yeah. Crazy.
Aren't we lucky to have guys like this around? And there is one more, let's say, explicit question I have for you, actually, because as you may know, I'm all into the, let's say, alternative research and, decoding also into Q, not in terms of necessarily blindly believing anything, just as any information from any information source. However, we also had some guests on Team Rabbit Hole and so on that really, like, as they say, go hard in the paint on this. And so I would just like to bring up two things. As you in the very beginning mentioned the idea of so-called civil war situations. And, of course, I've researched the psychology of this for quite some time. I'm sure you have as well. And there is, we talk about transplantation of consciousness, so understanding different perspectives. And maybe this can be interesting because apparently much of what is happening right now in terms of quote unquote community organizing, and basically I just call it, like rioting or instigating violence and chaos, apparently is sourced or based upon a book by Saul Alinsky. But maybe you yourself actually already mentioned this book called Rules for Radicals. Are you familiar?
Yes, very.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, then you perfectly know, because I was just reminded of this, that apparently there is a dedication, or it says on the 4th flyleaf page, there is the following text by Saul Alinsky. Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical. From all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which. The first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer. So what do you think about that?
I think that is yes, he's the very first subversive. Oh, man.
And then just to basically throw it right out there, and maybe one has to, like go also be into like specific decodes or communication channels, but one idea is going around. Of course, historically, Dark Journalist explains there is X share and X protect. I'm sure always have been different orders who have been differently polarized, or as it appears, of course, also within orders, especially bigger ones, you may always have those who choose the, let's say, left-hand path or negative polarization path of dominating others, and those who choose the positive path of not just keeping knowledge for themselves, as it was explained in this excerpt, but actually sharing it, because they know anyhow only those who are ready will be able to understand it. And especially now, I would say, even I guess Steiner would agree, that it's better to share this information rather than keep it to yourself. I have one particular idea here being in this potential, grand battle behind the scenes or actually in front of the scenes, is the question to what degree actually, let's say, Donald Trump, his, let's say, family background and establishment background and so on and so forth may actually be related to Rosicrucianism. And that this would also tie back to the whole idea of Tartaria, which we mention sometimes in terms of alternative history, and his relationships, and that, to put it simply, there have been at least two versions, even historically, let's say, of civilization. The one in this idea would be called, let's say, Tartarian type civilization based on self-responsibility and I would even say spiritual sovereignty and so on. And the other part, just to label it, would have been the Phoenician aspect, which kind of more came in and, you know, sought to enslave and domineer everyone and keep them in ignorance. And yeah, so I don't know how closely you followed all the symbolism surrounding all the strange things that are happening in Q and so on, but I just found that idea to be very, very interesting, especially because the Rosicrucians, also when I discovered their pictures and stuff, this, just like with Da Vinci and so on, they really kind of seem out of time. And at least to me, the official explanations don't really cut it in terms of Dark Ages and so on. But then you had these amazing luminaries at the same time. It doesn't really make sense to me. And I just find it super interesting without necessarily having to take a side or whatever. And luckily, I can't even vote in US. So, you know, I'm not being put on a stand on that level. But I just find it very interesting to contemplate, just as with the Sololinsky quote, directly, let's say, praising Lucifer, which is also just a symbol. So it's always about how it is being interpreted, what is really being meant. And then, let's just say, simple example, apparently, at least in terms of rhetoric and also it seems actions, Trump, for example, seeming to really, let's say, persecute all those involved in the really bad kinds of, you know, human trafficking and so on and so forth. You know, also being anti-abortion, all these things, I just find interesting.
The thing about Trump that just I find trippy. Okay, you know, I've been exposed to Trump for decades and decades.
Yeah, right.
And,
I just briefly, I just watched the Apprentice show. Anyone should watch it to see him like 10 years ago, like, you're fired, you know?
Right.
It's funny, yeah?
And when I first heard he was running, I was like, oh man, that's just what we need, a game show
Gotta
host.
Be a joke, right?
Yeah, a game show host. I really thought it was a joke. I laughed. And then I'm watching him win primary after primary, and I started listening to what he was talking about doing. And I realized that he was not only running against the Democrats, but he was running against the Republicans as well.
Oh, yeah.
And yet he still got the nomination, which just dumbfounded me, to be perfectly honest with you.
But there's got to be something going on, right?
And you know, I think one of the reasons he inspires so much hatred, besides the fact that he just says crazy, stupid shit from time to time, or a lot, actually. But, you know, he's been talking about the threat with China since the 90s, you know, and it's like he's fought against the establishment of the entrenched politicians, the career politicians for a long time, and they hate that. And then I remember the night I went to bed the night before the election returns came in. And I think at the time Hillary Clinton was slightly ahead. And all of the news people were like just elated, and they were already dancing, and the parties had already started. And I went to sleep, slept for a couple hours, got up, checked what's going on, and all of a sudden I noticed that the elation of the newscasters had turned to a somber.
Why is everyone so down? We got a new president.
Oh my God, dude! And it just got worse and worse and worse. And you know, I woke up in the morning going, "Wow, this is a really strange feeling," because, you know, if Hillary Clinton got elected, man, I just had this like awful fucking like nut in the pit of my stomach about how bad that's gonna fucking be. And then I thought, well, if Donald Trump gets elected, oh man, and my stomach just sort of did a flip flop again. Oh man, we got a game show host for a president. Holy God, what has happened to the world? And you know, I have been kind of astounded. I've never seen anyone that has had their agenda opposed more strenuously. Man, I mean, they have fought him at every single, it's the orange man bad syndrome, If Trump says the sky's blue, no, it's not. That's racist.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting to me, just to point this out once again, is by everyone, just right from the beginning, I would say, he had been called, even while running, a fool. He's a fool. And I mean, I will admit that at that point, actually, I believe I just came back from America, actually. And then for some reason, for like about a year or something, I was like, okay, I'm going to watch InfoWars now, which I don't do anymore. But anyhow, what was interesting is that Alex Jones actually...
I liked that guy for a while, and then he kind of went off the rails a little bit for me.
I mean, there's always everyone, different layers and so on. But honestly, I mean, I can respect him. I learned many things. At the same time, I'm like, he's, how do you say, like, he's rambling too much and so on, and is getting too angry. But anyhow, even he was supporting him. And, there is then always these layer upon layers, because at the same time, people become so paranoid that then they would also say, oh my God, the whole media is against him. Oh, then this will mean that this is like, the best trick ever. So that actually Trump will be the real threat, But at least historically, just as you mentioned, number one, he's had made quite interesting statements over the years, somewhat consistently, which is already interesting, and moves, it seems, from what I heard, or from what actually, I will check out his name once again. This is on Sarah Westall's channel. She's doing interviews with Detective, if I find him. Oh, very interesting. This page changed. So she's doing interviews with a New York detective. Anyhow, it's on Sarah Westall's channel. And he mentions he was let loose to do some research into human trafficking and stuff. And I think it was him who also mentioned that when they first did the investigation into Epstein, Trump, 10 years ago or something, Trump was the only one who readily and willingly supplied information. And I mean, to me, that's also telling me something.
Yeah, they're still trying to connect Trump to Epstein. I'm like, guys, get off of that horse, because it doesn't take, you don't have to scratch many layers off the surface of the onion to see the width and breadth of people for the Clintons. I mean,
oh yeah,
it goes on and on and on. It'll be curious to see whether Ghislaine Maxwell, survives being in prison. Because she knows a lot of stuff. But I mean, dude, Trump was against it. That's curious you bring that up. You don't hear many people acknowledge that, actually, but that's true.
And just to provide the exact reference, so it's Sarah Westall. The interviews are with Jimmy Boots. I guess anyone should watch it, because that's like, a real tenured detective and so on, who really tells you what he was able to discover when he was let loose, I believe still during the Reagan era or something. And of course then was halted, because this just goes, as always, straight up to the top in this case.
The very top.
Yeah, and has to be unraveled accordingly. In terms of the election, and again, transplantation of consciousness, understanding different perspectives, what I heard, and seems to me understandable enough, that actually the election, I mean, I don't really believe in elections anyhow, but that they were rigged actually quite strongly in favor of Hillary Clinton initially by, let's say, a deep state faction. The actual election results, the actual election results supposedly were more of a kind of a, let's say, landslide for Trump. At least if I just look in a very simple way, just look at rallies or something, where is anyone showing up, no matter what the polls say. So that's really interesting to me. And then it is said that actually Trump, because he has support from NSA and so on and so forth, he basically rigged it back. And yeah, that's kind of what happened. And this may also explain why Hillary Clinton and so on was so certain to win. And I think CNN made a poll like a month before or whatever and said there's a 98% chance Hillary Clinton will win. and also Bashar was asked during that time. And what he said, that in the fall of 2016, everything will change. So he announced that, and he also gave a prediction of 88% chance for Clinton to win, 22%, here again, 22% chance for Trump to win, and 11% chance for another completely unexpected outcome. Of course, here we are aware this is not really 100%, so this is some kind of different logic. But again, we have the 22 attribution for Trump.
Didn't quite add up.
Exactly. But we have the 22% attribution for Trump. But even here from that channel, let's say a higher probability for Clinton, just like the mass media said. And then, yeah, the apparently very much unexpected happened. And what we can say for sure is that some would say all hell break loose. However, in my impression, it is really just that since then, more and more things really have been released and revealed in a quite explicit fashion. And that's why it appears that way. But I'm always like, well, guys, don't be so dismayed or confused if you hear about some really bad stuff going on that is now proven beyond a doubt. And more comes out every day. It's not that this is new or because of something very recent that happened, but it's more like this is the structure we've been embedded in for my liking much too long. And now it just becomes apparent, which is great because now we can consciously choose what we prefer.
That's very true. It's really funny. All of the polls are, the CNNs and the news media isn't really the news media anymore. It's now kind of a PR arm for the Democratic Party. This is really funny. I just saw this earlier at the end of last week. The Democrats have introduced into the House a resolution that would remove statues of anyone, connected to the Confederacy or any of the founding fathers that were involved with slavery, or, just wipe all of that out from anywhere in the Capitol building. So they were like, okay, then we're introducing a resolution that says, anything having to do with slavery or that time, if you apply the same criteria to the Democratic Party, the Democrats can't be called the Democrats anymore, because as you go through the history of the Democratic Party, they were the Democrats were the founders of the Ku Klux Klan. It's like they were massive slave. It's like if you do any real research into the Democratic Party, it's all rooted in slavery and oppression. Lincoln was dead for 6 days after the end of the war, when he was assassinated. And who took over? Andrew Jackson, an avowed racist that did everything he could then to subvert the released slaves, getting rights, and tried to suppress that in every way that he could. And so it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out. It hasn't been very much of a, I like being in the center and watching the ping pong ball go back and forth, because it's just crazy. And I'm really waiting for a time when there is a standard that gets applied evenly to everybody, not just certain groups of people, like carving out stuff now there's words that certain groups of people can use and other groups of people can't. And oh man, it's just so many steps back from what the civil rights movement in the 60s was about. And it's gotten so fragmented, and I blame social media. I think that social media world has completely fragmented our society into little mini subsets of people that just foster their own points of view regardless of any factual, the flat earth thing, dude. Really? The earth is flat? You really believe that? And there are people that'll fight you over that. like, yes, okay, Earth's flat, no problem, bro.
I'm not going to fight you, but all I can say about this, where I got to, initially also I heard about it. There's some popular videos, and you can be like, oh, then you get the recommended videos that are debunking it so smartly. All I can tell you from what I'm grokking of all of these perspectives is that at least there are quite a few very intelligent and very scientifically minded, one may call flat earthers or non-globe believers, that actually are also actively seeking out discussions with, physicists and everyone, just to talk through all of these points. And the way I see it, at least, the, let's say, established science is much more reluctant to have open discussion than the crazy, flat earthers. And there's simple aspects like the idea that apparently we have no real instance of someone actually encircling the globe, for example, with a plane or something. There have been some reports that this had been done, but upon closer inspection, you can see that they're actually going more like a zigzag thing or something and not really going around the whole thing. And then the really, really obvious point for me, where I can just know, and that's a great point they share, I think, is, Antarctica is warded off. And no one, just like now with the current situation of the lockdowns or whatever, everyone can agree suddenly. And also there back then, strangely enough, everyone could agree that nobody should be allowed to go there. And then the image that I kind of like, and I'm not saying that that's the case, I just like the perspective. If you would look at the globe, you would say that Antarctica actually is, like an island or whatever, or like ice shells on one tip of the, in this case, not perfectly, but somewhat spherical planet. And in another perspective, and it doesn't necessarily then mean that for this the Earth would have to be flat, but just switching your perspective, if you understand that Antarctica actually has like this ice wall thing, reminds one of Game of Thrones or whatever, and you would just paint it kind of differently, or just like you look at the UN flag or something, then you could also say that we are living on a surface, however it's shaped exactly, and we are surrounded by an ice wall, and we're actually just in a kind of small circle, and who knows how much more space there actually is on this surface. You see what I'm getting?
I'm all for theories and exploration of possibilities, but for me, the thing that informs my point of view on that is moving my consciousness out beyond where the Earth is and looking back on it. And it's a globe, dude. For me, it's a globe. It can be whatever it needs to be for anybody else. I don't care. But when I go out and check it out, it's a big round rock, with a lot of water on it.
Right now, I guess, of course, the question would be, in what ways we have been framed and so on. Even here, I'm just pointing this out again without necessarily taking sides. One may investigate when they actually started to make globes for classrooms and stuff like this. There was all these issues with, different map projections. You have the Ortelius map and all kind of things, which maybe show a different perspective. Also, Mount Meru is another keyword. So very, very interesting maps. And another thing that you've got with, so now, of course, I lost my point, but kindly do continue.
I wanted to ask, you said there's nobody that's actually gotten on a plane and flown around the world. But dude, what about the space station? What about the plethora of satellites in orbit around our, how does that get explained? And how does it get explained when you watch video of the from outside the space station? You watch going around the whole world.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So here, anyone interested, and of course, hearing this at first, it may be like, oh my God, like, what are these crazy people? Like, they claim the Earth is flat and they say NASA is fake and so on. All I can recommend everyone is, check out channels like Globebusters, maybe they're still on YouTube, or Spacebusters. They also have some great information on the current situation. And what I really like about them is they really dissect NASA footage, for example. And once you start taking a look at all the strange things happening there, you won't believe it. I mean, one quite recent thing, for example, with the most recent launch of whatever SpaceX someone did, you could actually see a rat, but like, I don't know how many 100 kilometers supposedly in the air, and you could see a rat like moving around. And there's many other instances where you can see kind of like glitches and so on, which appear like green screens or something like this. And then especially, that was a big point for me, once you understand that the NASA astronauts supposedly are doing all their supposed training in a huge like water tank or something, then you can really see how they could recreate that kind of appearance. And then when you start seeing bubbles or something on the official supposed space footage and many other strange things, it is not so hard to understand anymore why some people would question it. Of course, some go really hard into it and maybe even turn it into zealotry, which is probably never the right approach. But what could also be mentioned in a support, just let's say, of multiple models, of course.
To what end is that zealousness?
Oh, I can explain it to you. So, I mean, the zealousness, of course, is never necessary or whatever. But in terms of logic, number one, of course, you have all these kind of religions and so on. You know, the Norse tree of life and all these depictions that not really show like a round globe. Doesn't mean it doesn't look like this, but at least there are many of these conceptualizations. And what I discovered when listening to some of these researchers, and you know, many of them even aren't harping on the flat Earth. It's one thing they discuss. Many also have other topics, and it's great to watch, at least because you get an, you know, even if you say it's definitely a globe, you can use that to check, like, you know, try to falsify it. And where potential zealotry comes from, as I understand it, that for quite a few people, the revelation that, let's say, something is wrong with NASA, let's say, and there are too many strange things, that for them, it's kind of the switch where they first discovered on a grand scale that they're being lied to. And for me, it was different because I was very much aware that I'm being lied to from all kinds of sides. And when I stumbled upon this, I was more like, oh, well, actually, I'm not surprised at all. And then you just look at, and it's always so simple. It's incredible. You just look at the money flows. And I think NASA consumes, or space, whatever stuff, consumes more than the entire, I think, game and movie industry on the planet combined. So it's good money. And it's pretty nice, even if you just put yourself into the frame that all they do mostly is, let's say, fake kind of action films or something, then it's also super profitable. And
is that what you believe? Do you believe NASA's fake and that all of the space exploration is just Hollywood hoaxes?
Oh, well, I cannot speak to each and every instance. What I can tell you is that there's, in terms of flat Earth, there's actual NASA technical papers where they tell you, they make all kinds of calculations and so on. And then at the end, they say, yeah, this paper was made with the assumption of a flat stationary Earth. That's from NASA. And another example, I mean, even Andreas Exerdes recently done a YouTube video on the so-called moon tapes, that apparently the tapes from the moon were stored in an old McDonald's, and he somehow managed to go there. Some people were there. He managed to look at some of the things, but it kind of then got, I don't know, shipped away or lost or something.
A McDonald's restaurant?
Yeah. It's a fucking joke. I'm a former McDonald's restaurant that got transformed into like a temporary, I don't know, archive for these tapes. Andreas Exerdes made a video about it. And so you got that point. And then also even the idea, NASA themselves, apparently they're saying, yeah, of course we went to the moon in 1969. And then they ask, why not going back, like Mars and so on? Why is that so important? Why not just go back to the moon? We've been there 40 years ago with a, you know, computer that maybe had the power of a Game Boy or something. And what they say apparently is like, yeah, we're really sorry, but we kind of lost the technology. And quote, it's a really painful process to build it back. And I'm not like, sorry, but what the F? In somewhere, you know, you got to draw the line. there's many, many more things. I can just really encourage everyone to research this. It doesn't mean you need to adopt a particular belief, but especially with these grand, unquestioned assumptions. And again, I see people running around with NASA shirts, and I'm like, wow, what is your benefit from this? Because all that I can hear is for the 100th time, they started planting some, I mean, I wish it was mushrooms, but I don't know what on the space station, supposedly. And just, you can tell that there's a huge amount of money and energy and resources being sucked into this. And I would claim that the actual benefit to humanity at large is very much questionable, as important as space exploration is. But then it's also obvious to me that would you really assume that individuals on that level wouldn't already have heard of, transplantation or teleportation or more advanced types of propulsion, and they are still claiming that they are, doing all these jokes with chemical rocket stuff, which, as I understand, is like super complex, super hard to do, and not safe, and has all these issues. So I just basically, for me, there's too many red flags. Even just look at the NASA symbol. It's basically a forked tongue of a snake. And if I understand properly, NASA or something similar in Hebrew even simply means lie or something like this. So there's too many strange things that I would not fundamentally question whatever NASA is releasing. And of course, most of their pictures, even officially, are simply CGI composites. Even the famous images of Earth that we are all familiar with basically are CGI composites. And while one may know that, and it's not secret, that is not really what is relayed when NASA is releasing anything. So all these kind of issues add up to me that, at least I can tell, there's a definite choke point where very few individuals decide whatever is published and seen. And I don't trust strongly centralized structures of that nature by default.
Alrighty then.
That somewhat makes sense to you?
I can connect with it intellectually, but it's so far outside of what my core belief is that not really. And like with the moon, and we lied about the moon, like so many, like everything has been sort of taken apart, like it's all just a big fake conspiracy. And at the end, it's like there's lots of ways to make money, like coming up with a scam like that just seems so beyond complex. The number of people that were involved in NASA,
and not to, just to be the, how do you say, defense attorney or something. I'm sure you're familiar with the Manhattan Project, how many people were involved here, and supposedly no one really knew what's going on. And again, there's great investigative, let's say, documentaries, even with guys going around in wherever it is, like this launch site, like hanging out at bars and meeting all these kind of employees. And all they really trying to do is like they're trying to really verify that someone, let's say, got the original signal from, whatever space probe or something. And then when you realize that even the guy who supposedly is right on the thing, like the first to know, he's also just receiving, a signal, let's say. And yeah, I mean, there's too many things, and I don't want to be facetious in that sense.
So what I always come back down to is the bottom line guy in me goes, okay, what's to gain out of the conspiracy?
Yes, that's important. That's very important. And I would say it's very simple. And this is the same with almost all conspiracies. Let's say almost all attempts to confuse and dilute human consciousness, in my perspective, it is always only about three questions. So where do we come from? Where and who are we? And where do we go to? And of course, here, the whole operation of NASA, along with all the science fiction and so on, gives you a whole timeline, basically. And that's also why then when people get disillusioned with that, they may become somewhat zealous about different perspectives. But all that I can say and would like to reinforce here, everyone kindly, look at, critical reports of NASA footage and so on, and, astronaut interviews, strange happenings there, and you see there's just too many strange things, not at least to become curious about investigating it further. Also, I wasn't aware of it for a long time, but yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So the end game of exposing all of this is to make NASA go away?
Well, I would just say, in my view, this is just my, simple worldview. For example, CERN would be right among those, probably many other organizations too. It's just anywhere where basically, we funnel tons of money, we put some so-called scientists or exalted individuals there, translate priests. They interpret whatever they do with their amazingly expensive machinery, which everyone pays for. The value that is actually gained is questionable. And so definitely, even just in terms of properly allocating resources and consciousness, I'm not sure if that would be a, let's say, goal. It's a good question. Like, what would be the goal of someone? But I think I can tell you. I would say fundamentally, it's about the destruction of illusion. Of course, we may then argue maybe you enter into new illusions or something like that. But at least the way I see the world, and we just spoke about mass media and how they're all, centrally, let's say, controlled in a sense, or seem to toe the same line. I basically see NASA as part of the grander control structure for human consciousness, because it's really reinforcing this idea, we're going out there with a rocket and so on. And anyone who knows anything, including you, about channeling and magic and so on, we know about teleportation, we know about transplantation, we know about the ability of real so-called UFOs to simply relocate at will and basically teleport, because they're just changing their space-time coordinates and they're not effing around with any sort of chemical fuel or anything like that. So even if they would claim, or if I want to believe them, that they're really trying hard for this exploration and so on, and they're so great and they're doing their best, and sorry, they're using the wrong technology to start with, and they have to know, so they cannot feign ignorance on that. And even just here, playing around with that idea of sending rockets around and so on, to me, it's just a joke.
Okay. Yeah. I've been big following all of the Mars rovers from day one, and
right,
and just amazing at the pictures that have come back from Voyager, and the probes that we've sent out, and Cassini that crashed into Saturn and Jupiter, and those things have a ring of truth to me, and it's hard to think that those were someone's fabrications, especially when there's real information that's coming out that you can go astrally check, things about Pluto, Uranus, man. What a crazy, you would expect Uranus to be really cold, but the core of that's super hot, and it's got its own superstorm, like on Jupiter. And it's, I see those things getting explained and providing stair steps to actually go out and explore our neighborhood, more physically, to actually go to different places. The rocket fuel thing is ridiculous. I don't think there's anyone that purports that that's the do-all for getting around. But I think there are other technologies that are being worked on, but are far from being perfected. And I can transport myself to any planet in the solar system, but that's my consciousness. I don't know how to make my body go there, and actually feel it and experience it with my flesh. I can feel it and experience it with my astral flesh, you know. So it has a ring of truth. Like when I go and scope out with my own astral travels, the information that I'm getting, you know, from those, I find a lot of correlations. And, you know, it kind of excites me to think that we're going to be moved. You know, it's time. It's time for us to move out of the apartment and into the big city, you know?
Oh yeah, well, I completely agree. The only thing I'm saying, and that's all the kind of layout, along with SETI and so on. I mean, the thing is, I just pulled up one interview, Laura Eisenhower interview with Stuart Swerdlow, that's Swerdlow. He's apparently been one of the ones who did the early remote viewing in like 60s and so on, and was trained for that. And what I want to get at is even he mentions all the tech they already had, like, you know, you basically hook yourself up to a machine, you're in the right consciousness state, and then you can manifest stuff physically at will. Then we have, I think, a 2003 patent for a type of triangle-shaped UFO with a magnetheric type motor. Not sure if that would be technically able to go into space. What I'm just saying is that to me, it's also very, very obvious that since many decades at least, we are kept in a state of artificial technological progression. Therefore I just see such timelines and propositions as very questionable, because I'm just aware that we have tech much superior since quite some time. It's been suppressed, and even on the supposedly highest level of the strongest, best, you know, like space exploration endeavor, NASA along with SpaceX, they're not even really talking or promoting these ideas, because what they're not cool with, in my impression, is the, let's say, true view of consciousness, you know, as everything being one and connected. So they are still approaching it from a linear perspective with rocket fuel and all of these things, and trying to reach to the stars and so on, whilst again, even just on an obvious level, we mentioned all the issues today, you know, hunger, famine, however you want to call it, all of course self-made, because we're very inefficient in managing and distributing our resources and our organizational structures. And this is just one huge part that's siphoning off energy. And before I'm looking at colonizing another planet, even as a species, I'm first gonna dedicate all my resources to make sure that everyone on this planet, you know, has a decent life and all the potential fulfilled for creative expression. And then I can think about chipping in billions and billions to build a huge accelerator in Switzerland and send that many spaceships and so on and so forth. You kind of see what I'm getting at. It's like with the church almost.
How so?
Well, they also, I mean, kind of claim they do so many great things for people, but they're just, in my view, telling you, of course, in main organized religions, too often telling you a bullshit story that's not really, maybe that's the other point also with NASA and the worldview, because here in NASA, you're potentially, especially in the materialistic worldview, which you may not subscribe to, but many fans certainly would, you know, you're just a random sum of cells that somehow got animated by a lightning strike or something, but you're pretty insignificant. You're just one of 8 billions floating around on a rock in space that's rotating, if I'm not wrong now, at 6,666 miles per second. There's some really strange numerology in their main baseline data for the planets as well, which is worth checking out. And yeah, maybe you're going to live, you're going to die. Maybe you can load yourself up to an AI or something. Maybe you can escape the planet. But they're certainly not going to be the ones who are going to tell you you're an infinite immortal being. You can actually already now visit the planets, just like you mentioned. They are in a completely different frame of mind. They're not open to the alternatives. And that just seems to me like another variant, you know, to catch the imagination of humans and actually divert them from, number one, the true inner powers and abilities, as you explained. And number two, the real technology already available that may actually be suitable, you know, to explore this solar system and who knows how many other layers, levels, and universes.
Yeah. So, you know, I wanted to I wanted to talk to you this time about farseeing a little bit. And you know, there's so many videos out, and I'm thinking about the whole thing right now: the pandemic, the civil unrest, the Black Lives Matter, the Chinese thing. You know, there's so many. It's like a boiling soup right now. You know, there's so much stuff getting churned up all the time. So, you know, I definitely like getting outside information and watching videos and reading papers. Man, I've read so much over the last year. My brain is stuffed. But I think in the end, you know, the point of view that informs me that I always wind up putting trust in is my own reach out astrally to see what's likely to shake down. And I wanted to, do you ever do any farseeing, like, you know, 3 to 10 years out and pull stuff out of that? Is that something you practice doing?
Well, actually, I guess in my frame of mind, that's kind of too far out. But I'm familiar with some, let's say, related techniques, at least to measure change. So one example is a tool by Bashar called the Threshold of Believability. And you could say, simple example, I want a huge house. And then you can ask yourself, oh, well, I can have this huge, amazing house that I would really like to live in 10 years. And then you see, would you read and say, yeah, sure, in 10 years, no problem. Okay, ask 5 years. 5 years, no problem. 3 years, maybe. And then by this way, you can tell your own belief system structure, how aligned it is, and how fast something could manifest. So this tool I'm aware with, but I haven't really, I guess, meddled with trying to look into discrete future potentialities, aside, of course, from different stories and so on I'm familiar with.
That was one of my first. I think that was kind of one of my natural set points, and like stuff. I had really incredibly intense dreams as a kid, or weird little visions, and I'd come out with stuff to my mom, and she'd be like, "What? And where did that come from?" And 5 years later, like that exact thing would happen. And that's always been kind of an area of interest for me. You know, the thing with farseeing is that, you know, you're sitting there with a reading with someone and you tell them what happens next week. It's pretty easy to see whether you were accurate or not. You know, when it's 5 years from now or 10
Right.
years from now or 20 years from now, it's like, wow. Like I know somebody that's like kind of really crazy good with like 10 to 20 year spans. I'm like, you know, that's really cool, but I'm not sure exactly how helpful that is. Plus, you know, when you reach out, you know, you're not reaching out to a reality that is concretionized, you know, and solidified. You know, there's flows that cruise around the world, you know, that are really not realities yet, but are potentials and trends, hugely trends. And in those flows are different possibilities that are brighter or less bright, coming faster. You know, and I think this is my opinion from my research with my own work. You know, that what happens is that you reach out to those future flows, and whatever's brightest there winds up okay, that's it. You know, that's the vision. But I think the thing that's suspect on that, well, not suspect, but I think the trick is not to get locked into that as that is a foregone conclusion. I think that you just wound up picking up the brightest possibility of the moment, which is always changing. And depending on, you know, they're like flows that happen around the world that are global flows. But then those flows are also influenced by the people here and their reaction to events that are happening, and those push those in different fluid ways. It's kind of like looking at the surface of Jupiter, you know, with all of those bands of clouds, you know, that are inhabiting their own space, yet they're formed together in a mass, and they're all happening at once, and they're all affecting each other in really crazy ways that are not really predictable. So anyway, I was just going to ask you, you know, with all of this craziness coming down, you know, where we are to this moment, when you reach out like a year, what's your opinion of what you think is a probable possibility manifesting?
No, that's a great question. Just give me not really half a minute, just a second.
I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I sleep all night and I work all day. I cut down trees, I eat my lunch, I go to the lavatory.
Nice.
Monty Python, man. Monty Python, yeah. The Holy Grail. I have that movie I've got memorized.
Oh, yeah.
We are the knights who say me. And the knights who say me demand a sacrifice.
Oh, yeah. Definitely Monty Python. Anyone who hasn't seen the 4, 5, 6 movies he made, I somewhat recently watched them. And yeah, they're really great. So
those guys are geniuses. They really are.
We even watched Life of Bryan in English class in high school. I didn't really grok it at that point, but yeah, good stuff. So 1 year from now. Okay. So what I'm doing, you know, lazy as I am and crutches as I'm using, I pulled a card from the Galactic Heritage deck, and as of course always, the tarot cards never fail me. So what I drew was the card number 79, Renewed Hope, Zeta Reticuli, Present Timeline. And aside from the whole, you know, alien story and so on, renewed hope. So I'm very much on that wavelength of renewed hope. I have quite some faith in humanity to look through all kinds of illusions and recognize the power within themselves, especially now as apparently outside pressures and confusion becomes ever greater. I think this will really put many at the very center of their own power. And then just even numerologically, it also fits perfectly. It's a 79, which of course we know standard tarot decks only have 78 cards. So it's potentially really about entering a completely new frame of reference, which of course, because I guess most individuals listening would agree that what the consensus right now is working with in so many different areas is very much outdated. So I could very much see quite grand changes and very positive ones. And also I can see the possibility that much of what is happening right now in terms of stressors and so on are not really indications that we are being let down a really bad timeline, but more that they are like wake-up calls and indications for individuals, or almost like a storyline to recognize many different things. So I see, in a sense, great revelation, great destruction of illusion, and then along with more recognition of truth and one's own authority and intuition, I also see that renewed hope.
Cool. So when I do when I do a reach out a year out, like right around the first of the year, maybe just before the first of the year, there is a big, huge, bright bubble, and it's like what's taking place now and the instability that is happening right now, where things never want to stay in motion and unstable. They always want to find equilibrium, and that's trying to happen right now, but it's like, it keeps getting scrambled so hard that nothing can solidify at the moment. But I think that there are a couple of things, if they take place, if they go in one way, I agree with you wholeheartedly. A profoundly better time is on the way, and that's actually the one that I think is brightest for me, and the one I firmly believe in. But there's also a possibility, if things kind of go a certain way, that there are two more waves of intensity. The first one is about 6 months out, maybe 7 months out, and it would make this whole pandemic thing seem like a picnic, man. It will be very, 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 very bad and ugly. And out past that, in another like 2 to 3 years, is another one that would come behind that would just be very, very bad. So, but I have, you said it best. I have hope and faith in humanity and in the ability of light to prevail, even when it seems really dark. Sometimes that's the, it's at the moment of greatest darkness that we really become aware of our true light, and that's a saying, but it's also a real truth. And I have countless times in my life where it just seemed like, man, I was never going to see any dark or any light again. And the next day, there's the sun breaking through those black clouds, man, with a ray of sunshine and life and renewed hope.
It is already a year from now, in your estimation as well?
That a year from now, things are either going to be really in a very cool place, which is what I think will actually happen, or there's going to be a really devastating new global wave of destruction that's going to be very, very ugly. And not really another COVID kind of scenario, something a lot worse, and on a really global mode that no one will be immune, and that's a very frightening possibility for me. So I'm pouring out all the energy I can towards the first option, And if you think that doesn't have impact, you're
then you run into trouble.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, I guess this is really what it comes back to, the realization how efficient, in a sense, or effective, how authoritative we are, at the very least within our own subjectively experienced individual timeline. So everyone...
I want to make sure that I'm not like putting it out like Lahr's predictions for the future. That's my best guess at the moment, based on the information I've been able to get. As that bright bubble like gets influenced some more with some stuff that's happening to it, that will become clearer and clearer and clearer. We'll keep an update on it, man, as that approaches, and see how that changes. But that's my best guess. I'm not putting that forth out as a prediction for doom and gloom at all. But it
Or
is
maybe
a real,
next show
it is a
we
real
can do an
possibility.
oh for sure. Maybe next show we can do an extended reading and just do a let's say I was about to say test prediction, but just like a reading of the energy, and then we can come back here later and see if we were accurate at all.
Yeah, that would be really great. I'd love to do that. That's fun to do. How do you get your visions? When you get info about what's coming, don't you?
Yeah, well, sometimes depending how tuned in I am. Well, actually, there is, everyone has different methods, and again, it's really about understanding how important your own choice and your own recognition and awareness is. So if something is triggering you, obviously it's relevant. So one good example here would be that recently I was in a, one may say somewhat visionary state or whatever, and I was talking to a new friend, let's say, or someone I hadn't spoken to a lot. We're kind of talking about realities and frameworks, and also what is happening now and what is going to be happening. And I was briefly thinking about it, and immediately, of course, all these prophecies and ideas came to mind, and many of them, also historically, at least point to the idea that this is really, a time of choice, basically. As Bashar always says, you are beings of choice. And as we know, every reading, even the most gloomy Nostradamus reading, is just a reading from that particular perspective, and so on and so forth. So that all has to be taken into account. And it's just a probability anyhow, and can be interpreted in many different ways, of course, That's always a matter of perspective. But the one I attempted to recount at that point, and I didn't manage for a few minutes because I was crying, was the Hopi Prophecy, which basically paraphrased, says that on the first rainbow gathering, David, a Hopi elder, said that there will be a time, or which was already then in 60 something, where the water and the air will be polluted and the environment will be destroyed. However, there will be individuals from all nations and all tribes that will be called the so-called warriors of the rainbow, and they will have feathers in their hair and grow their hair, and they will basically restore the ecological balance on this planet. And of course, it is also recounted that just right then, the sign would be a white buffalo, and of course, they left the gathering. The snow was melting in the Colorado mountains, and there was a white buffalo. So the prophecy has come, and just reading the indications of what's going on right now, it's kind of obvious to me that all these, let's say, high-level prominent prophecies are kind of playing out now. However, how they are playing out exactly is, of course, very much up to us, and many of them even very much explain the choice that has to be made. Even in Law of One, Ra always talks about catalyst, always talks about, just like Bashar, about choice. And Ra especially talks about polarization. So whether you wish to polarize positively or negatively, meaning go towards love and unity, or towards fear and separation. And I just really feel that all these pressure points occurring right now are really just the accelerated catalyst, which is asking each and every one to make a clear choice for themselves. For just as Jesus said, again as a representation of generalized fourth density consciousness, be ye hot or be ye cold, if ye are lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth. Which to me, again, just means it's time to make a choice.
That is so true. That is absolutely true. I think every second's a choice. You get to choose to be happy. You get to choose, like every single one of them is a choice. Sitting on the fence gets you nothing, even though that's a choice too.
Totally is.
So yeah, let me bring this one up, and we're kind of running a little bit out of time. I've got a cruise in about 15. There's a website called Earthmaster. Are you familiar with that by any chance?
No, I don't think so.
You know, I would strongly encourage you to connect. Earthmaster is this guy that has this software that that shows seismic activity all over the world. And what's really great is his visual. It's the best visual of that I've ever seen, and it's put the seismic picture for me of the planet in such a graspable whole, instead of just, well, something's happening in California or there's an earthquake in China. You could, the graphic has all the fault lines of the earth, and you're seeing where all the earthquakes are happening in pretty much real time. And the information that comes with each of the quake little graphics things says, how deep it was in the earth, what the intensity of it was, and then measures all the aftershocks. It's a fantastic thing. And what I've been scoping that pretty much for the last 4 months, and I'm noticing that he uses this method of kind of predicting where the next hit will be, and a general range of what intensity that next quake will be, and it's like very accurate. And seeing the way that intense earthquakes happen and how they ripple then across the globe, and how those things happen and get reflected on the opposite side of the globe. Wow, really, really, truly amazing. We're building up for some serious seismic activity. There's been some crazy stuff going on. Certainly there have been a ton of smaller earthquakes in China, but they're escalating out. There was one 7.8 near Fiji, and a bunch of things that are happening really deep. And they're predicting something big to kind of happen on the west coast of the United States pretty soon, which, everybody's been waiting for forever. But just watching how he graphs it out really makes sense. I'll be really curious to watch what happens, and I'd encourage you to go give it a scope and see what you think about that too. And I was reading a paper a couple days ago that was exploring the correlation between earthquakes and solar activity, and the study just goes back 20 years. That's when it began. But now there's 20 years of data that make an absolute correlation to the degree of solar activity and the degree of earthquake activity that happens on the earth. And kind of an interesting scenario, that it's affecting, lightning and electricity doesn't come from the sky to the earth. Lightning explodes from the earth up into the clouds and the sky. Yeah. So the solar activity disrupting some of the electrical charge within the earth itself, and creating these scenarios that then kind of blast out from the earth. Really, really very, very, very good research that you probably should scope out as well. Have you followed? Earthquakes are kind of an interesting phenomenon for me. I've always been really fascinated by them. And man, it seems like there's a plethora of the end time disasters. Like China's just about underwater right now. And if a couple of these earthquakes happen near the Three Gorges Dam, that could just be a disaster of immense proportions. And you know what city's just down the river from the dam is Wuhan. It'll be an island floating. The Chinese put out the government newspaper or news organization put out a statement about all the flooding, saying that actually it's really very beautiful and fairy-like mountains rising from the lakes, talking about the houses coming up out of the floodwaters. Like, guys, wow.
It's interesting. I mean, what's always really curious to me, and again, depending on how deep one is into these topics, this may be well or less well imagined. There was always the idea of, like a force of nature, or, like the universe responding. However, then being aware of all the technologies, open and not so open, that are existing, talking about weather modification, talking about art. Actually, I mean, there's even papers on this. It's not even that this is so secret.
You're
I
right.
believe it's a UN paper even on the idea of the banning of, what is the right word? Not geothermal weapons, but like the banning of earthquake machines and stuff like that. Yeah. So, I mean, if they even had to put a ban out for it, then, probably something like this exists. And then what I'm also always thinking about in terms of insurances, we know in the financial system, much depends on that. There is usually like a clause for an exemption. Well, if it's a force of God or force of nature, then we're not going to pay. And that's, of course, amazing if then you can create an event that to someone maybe uninformed appears like a natural event. But even just one simple example with the Australia fires, if I understand this properly, that apparently for years there, they had changed the irrigation and so on. So they, like for years, kind of dried it up because of policies and so on. And so then it's not such a, natural occurrence anymore. And where it gets really tricky then, really, really tricky in my view, whilst I totally believe that, we're in communion and communication with Mother Earth, when they put forward like ideas, oh, now it's the wrath of God, because you were breathing too much and used up too much CO2, now the tsunami is going to hit you or something, or the earthquake's going to happen. On some levels it may be related, but it's really, it really gets tricky if then, let's say, motive is being assigned and also certain remedies being assigned, when it may be, at least in some cases, that it's simply a man-made event. So the real issue, whilst it's always, I mean, if an ecosystem crashes, it's obvious because, we polluted it too much, right? Yeah. But that sometimes this may have us looking into the wrong directions. So instead of then, feeling guilty and saying, oh, there's been an earthquake, it's the wrath of God, rather also check all the other factors that may have contributed to this idea, or like with the fires, policies. So one may then maybe not just feel guilty, but, maybe take more control of their own government or whatever. So this doesn't happen in the same way. I think you can see where I'm getting with this.
Well, the perfect example of that are all the California fires that happened over the last few years. And the truth of that is that the land management policies, like, kept that in a scenario that it just kept getting thicker and thicker and thicker, and created this like perfect fuel for that to just explode, and it's I think that's a really good example of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There are a lot of there are a lot of things going on right now in the world that, could be assigned to that, oh, it's the wrath of God thing. There's a really big movement in China, among the people that are taking it that the ancestors are pissed off, and the first emperor is very mad, and like there's a really large belief system there that is kind of fueling up. It'll be interesting to see if they exert enough influence and intensity to challenge the CCP, which is having its own struggles right now.
Yeah, right. But especially with Wuhan, that's why I brought it up, actually. I mean, if you talk about flooding Wuhan, after locking it down and all these things, this has been traditionally, as I understand, the most rebellious province. And especially last year, they had many protests in Hong Kong, and, like many, many, many reasons that as a government that wants to control its citizens, you would just love for some chaos and some need for a strong hand, right?
And what better way to get rid of everybody all at once and just to open the floodgates and flood out 400 million people? If the Three Gorges Dam goes down, that that affects such a huge amount of the country. It's not just a little bit along the river, man. It like, wow, it decimates a lot of infrastructure and people, and man, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, so all we can
Kinda
do, I
crazy.
guess, is choose a, as I would say, more life-preserving, benevolent timeline, where ideally these things do not need to happen.
You know, we're creatures of creation, you know, so whatever the, you know, what's the point in reaching out and getting a truth? You know, it's like the tarot readings, you know. I always preface it up front that this is not written in stone, a truth that is in fact going to happen, but this is like an astral weather forecast that shows you the flows of energy that, you know, if you don't like the outcome, affect the flows along the way, you know, and see what happens. So we all have our own ability within this video game that we live in, you know. Hopefully the guy that's running the game doesn't get tired and shut the computer off. You know, but just keep creating your own reality, like as clear and as hard as you can, and projecting that out. And, you know, if you're creating the reality of new hope and new possibilities and new opportunities for everyone to live a better life, you know, then that's what will manifest. And if you buy into the fear, and, you know, one of the things of just kind of like acknowledging when they're bad cards in a reading is to be able to do something about them, you know, and to be able to like affect that particular part of it and go, okay, if I change that circumstance, then that changes the flow for the rest of it, you know. And I think that we have way more power to manifest our realities than we give ourselves credit for. And as long as we keep it in construction of what we want and where we all want to go, you know, that'll be an excellent future, as opposed to the apocalyptic hell that is the other alternative. Oh man.
Yeah, I would say I would just wholeheartedly agree. It's all about the recognition of one's own, let's say, ability to understand, ability to be effective, and very simply put, ability to make a free will choice, as always, to choose love or fear. And I always love to come back to this very simple idea. And if one made a clear choice in terms of polarization, it's also clear whether you choose love or fear, and then you just remain consistent in choosing love. That is what you prefer. And then, well, I don't see any other but a very lovely outcome.
Yes, indeed.
All right, then. We have anything else in terms of transplantation you want to bring up today, as we had a drive-by show?
Transplantation, you know, we got off on kind of a rocky foot there, and it never really felt good to bring it. So we'll save that one for the next show. It's a pretty lengthy conversation, so you know, we'll do that one next time. And
I'm all for it, but I also think that in terms of, you know, talking about different perspectives of the whatever space exploration, shape of the Earth, political perspectives, at least to me, that also has something to do with empathy, and at least to some extent, transplantation of consciousness, in terms of doing one's very best to feel into or resonate with another framework, another state of mind, in an effort, I guess, you know, at the end, to recognize the unity within it all.
Well, that's true. You know, the mode of transplantation that you know, the first exercise is to become a pencil. and to go inside a pencil and to perceive the world from an inanimate object, and that first step, I'll go into that at length, but, that first step, it's not really thinking, but there's still a perspective from that construct of matter, and having that ability then to go and transplant that into the way plants experience the world, water, like all kinds of things that are not actually alive, certainly changes your point of view in many, many ways. But then when you start, moving into animals and then to people and then to astral beings, it was amazingly eye-opening to me. And it's like seeing and really grokking completely another person's way of seeing something was just very informative to me. And it makes it so much easier to connect and to understand and to let go of the win-lose dynamic in most interactions with people, like there is such a my point of view, and you look around right now with there aren't a lot of discussions going on. There's just a lot of people yelling at each other, calling each other names. It's like grade school.
Yeah, that's why we're here. So we can have diverging opinions and still not start a fist fight. What a great skill, huh, Bryan?
Yeah, Yeah, but it's cool to be able to understand somebody's, I can understand somebody's point of view and how they arrived at that conclusion for themselves without that having to be my conclusion for the same stuff, and that's dude, that's what colors the world. I think that's an awesome thing. I don't think that's an awful thing. I'm not looking for a whole like Facebook groups where everybody agrees about a certain, and all those little groups get little weird group dogmas that then they, it's like, no, this is about your own personal view and like how you're perceiving the universe and how you're expressing that, I saw this thing that somebody put out of the African Museum or the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., and they published this thing that they just took endless grief for, man, describing whiteness. And one of the things that describes whiteness is rugged individuality, and I'm like, wow, that's a white thing? I thought that was an everybody thing.
That's super interesting. So how was it received? Like, were they giving them flack for saying that or something? Probably.
Well, it was the most racist document I've ever seen, ever. And it just goes down this whole list, like the nuclear family, having goals, like, and it's just this whole list of all of these things that are supposed to indicate whiteness, when those are attributes that everyone I know that succeeds in life, no matter what color they are, has adopted those characteristics. They're crazy. Look up the African Museum in DC and their definition of whiteness. And read it later.
I can only assume in terms of course I don't know the document, and what I may be able to see is some, let's say, of course doesn't apply to everyone, but like a cultural difference potentially, also maybe due to religions, like, Protestant work ethic and so on, that you may have, let's say, a greater occurrence of certain characteristic in a specific culture. Like, some cultures, I would say, emphasize individualism. One would, I guess, many of the so-called Western countries would be among them. So you're the best if, you move out when you're 15 or something. And maybe an opposite where it's still more normal to be like very well connected to your family and be in a more communal setting. maybe that would give less rise to individualism culturally. I'm just thinking now, one example, a recent documentary by Arte, I think, about that's like a European, let's say, cultural documentary channel that still delivers somewhat decent stuff, actually, and not just the worst kind of propaganda, which is great. And they talk about China, and they just show all the pressures. And there is a woman who is quite individualistic. So she is a lawyer and, obviously smart, beautiful, successful. However, she's, beyond the standard age for marrying because she doesn't want to be forced into anything. And they are recording her parents, going completely mad at her, just because she wants to live her own life, which I, of course, completely support. But here it really seems that in terms of cultural dynamics, that's really not what's expected of you. Whereas that kind of behavior, which may also be called individualism, would be much more expected and encouraged in a, Western instilled culture.
So I just brought up that document, and this is crazy. It's the document's called "Aspects and Assumption of Whiteness: White Culture in the United States," and the first category here is rugged individualism. The individual is the primary unit, self-reliance, independence, and autonomy highly valued and rewarded. Individuals assume to be in control of their own destiny. You get what you deserve. The second category is family structure. The nuclear family, father, mother, 2 to 3 children, is ideal social unit. Husband is a breadwinner and head of household. Wife is a homemaker and subordinate to the husband. Children should have their own rooms and be independent. And then the next one is emphasis on scientific method, objective, rational, linear thinking, cause and effect relationships, quantitative emphasis. It's like, how are those categories like linked to somebody being white?
Yeah, I mean, what I guess it's there. I mean, I really don't know, and I don't know who made the document or something, but to me, it sounds more like, as I mentioned, they are describing aspects that would more be attributed to quote unquote Western civilization. And I'm not sure why they think it relates to skin color.
Here, I'm about to send you this link right now. Yeah, on its way to you. It's just another example of how fractured everything's gotten. Everybody's looking at everybody to be the enemy, and somebody has to win. Instead of all of us winning, which is really possible, and that'll happen, and that'll be a really beautiful world. I can't wait. Hopefully, I'm around for it.
Well, my prediction would be yes, because aside from the idea of, and this maybe also relates to some of the things we discussed in terms of what is a actual new, let's say, human lifespan. So who knows how long each and every one of us will be around. At the same time, whilst I'm all for, tribulation times and so on, as long as they're necessary, I also see that once we get a basic grip on some of the ideas of, unity consciousness and individuality at the same time. So, it's always, the chemical marriage, alchemical marriage, however you want to call it, of both and being able to see it in that way. But I can really see that once this gets kind of more known on a basic level, and who knows how this may happen through different events, through intellectual processes, emotional processes, changes of belief systems, seeing the exemplary actions of individuals already now, that it also very well may occur that in one way or another, it kind of quote unquote dawns on many, many individuals quite rapidly that, just a spiritual understanding in one shape or another that we are all immortal, eternal beings. We all chose to be here, and we can create the reality we desire without having to hurt ourselves or anybody else in the process. I still see that as a very great possibility. And I also always see the,
Me too.
like graphs in terms of, exponential growth and so on. And we can certainly tell, something is moving in the system, obviously, no matter how you describe it or what someone may think about it. And to me, this may very well also be an indication that this curve that is exponential, has been going around between, 0.1 and 0.5 for quite some time. But since it's exponential, in just a very short time, it can reach a very different state. And this may also just relate to the level of consciousness. And if we could say that whether it's, or of course it is, let's say reactive or old belief systems within ourselves, also externalized as structures, and then we see all of the structures in the world and things and concepts and everything's being shaken up, then this to me could also just be an indication that the consciousness, of course, is rising. And that is why all of these apparently chaotic things are happening. But also, as I understand in systems theory, there is always chaos before there is a stabilization on a higher order. And we may very well be right there.
Instability before change can actually happen, because interrupting the momentum of the status quo when it may be broken, but it's still running, very, very difficult to actually affect any change. But when it all blows up and it's in a state of flux, that's when the real opportunity for making genuine change happens.
Indeed. So the window of opportunity in that sense for each and every one increases, although that is just a concept, because of course, I guess we agree that we pretty much have supreme authority ultimately if we are well aligned. Doesn't mean that we have to control everything that happens, but again, in terms of, general timeline that we wish to follow. So, yeah.
Well, we have supreme authority over ourselves. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, what else do you need? At least in my opinion.
Well, lots of other people like other control.
Exactly. And this then would be the question of polarization again. Again, negative polarization, attempting to control everything, including your environment and all the individuals within it. And positive polarization, just understanding that if you quote unquote control yourself, meaning just being willing to learn about yourself, understand yourself, and make the proper choices for yourself, then you actually don't need to control any particular circumstance or anyone else in the way it may be imagined from a negative point of view. And again, all I can say is, even considering the current situations and all the different viewpoints, I would very much congratulate each and every actor on the stage right now, whether it's really public or just you living your own life. I would say it's a pretty grand show at this point.
It is a grand show, man. I can't wait for the encore.
Yeah, I'm kind of like waiting for the first scene of the, I don't know, second act, or like the next Yuga, basically.
The overture was great.
yeah, indeed. Yeah, well, indeed. And even here, I see the great potentiality for even the things that are at first portrayed in the most negative and devastating light, and basically telling everyone the world is going to end. We know we had that many, many times before. In a sense now, the world,
in a sense, the world
may
has
end.
ended.
Yes, exactly.
It already
exactly.
has. Like the world before COVID was one scenario, and now, and when I say before COVID, because that was such a moment when like the whole world came to a stop within a couple days. So right. That was like a monumental moment, and the time since then has been. It's like pre-COVID. It'll stop being BCE now. It'll be pre-COVID. Crazy.
Yeah, and that's here I see the great potential, even just in the naming, of the coronavirus, so the poison of the crown. And even this may be, there's so many attributions that one may have here and perspectives, but again, seeing it very positively, this may very well be the test for each and every one, whether or not they choose to be, aligned also with their crown chakra. And again, this would bring me back to the idea that a strong and true connection, let's say, through the crown chakra into the quote unquote higher density or higher layers of awareness, is only really possible, again, through a definite choice of polarization, negative or positive. So, of course, it fits my belief system, so I'm just repeating it here, that I very much see this as a great catalyst. And not just in terms of like, it really can be turned around in every way. So nothing has, inherent energy or inherent meaning. It's really up to each and every one individually how we then transmute that energy and if we can use it in a way that's beneficial to us.
I could not agree more. Perfect. Well, I think I've done enough damage for today.
It's the creative type of destruction, As you may be aware, even with Discordianism, there's a good order and a bad order. There's a good chaos and a bad chaos, or let's not say good and bad, but constructive and destructive. So we just kind of keep it constructive here, and I think we'll be fine.
Well, a few decades ago, I ran across the philosophy of wabi-sabi, which is the idea that the true art is in the imperfections. So I apply that to life. The true art and beauty is in the imperfections. Not
especially for this density, I think that's a very healthy point of view.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, thanks as always for letting me occupy some airwaves for a little while, and as always, trade ideas with you. It's always stimulating and a happy time for me. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed the whole series, actually. By the way, I've been working on the new videos. They're a lot of work. So I'm having to kind of like find chunks of time to work on those, but I'm making significant progress. I should have you a new batch, hopefully maybe sometime next week.
Amazing. All in divine right timing. And as I have mentioned off record, the one definite comment we got was really sympathetic. Someone saying like, oh, finally, someone not just telling you to sit down and play clown, actually going deeper into it. I think that's great. And that's, in a sense, I guess, also what we're both aiming for as much as this is possible.
Absolutely. That's a real treat to hear that.
Thank you once again. And we're going to go out with another Shango track. Enjoy yourselves and talk to you in the now.
Thanks, Raphael.
Thank you so much.
The Galactic Mix rocks, by the way. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right.
Enjoy.
Radio Okitalk, Radio Okitalk, von Mensch zu Mensch.